Before we dive into this chilling story of steel, silence, and control, hit the like button and subscribe to support our mission of exposing the hidden world behind America's toughest prisons. Your support keeps these investigations alive, and you don't want to miss the truth that's coming next. Now, let's step inside the fortress they call the Alcatraz of the Rockies. High in the barren desert outside Florence, Colorado, a complex of concrete and wire sits surrounded by nothing but mountains and wind. Locals call it the cleanest place in Colorado. Prisoners call it hell on earth. Its official name, United States Penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX Florence. When it opened in 1994, the world had never seen anything like it. The United States was emerging from the violent prison uprisings of the 1980s, Marion, Illinois in 1983, Lewisburg, Atlanta, and Attica before that. Each riot left officers dead, units destroyed, and public trust shaken. The government's solution was simple: build a place so secure that chaos could never happen again. The design brief was brutal. No contact. No movement. No risk. Architects and federal security planners met with Bureau of Prisons (BOP) officials to create a facility capable of holding the worst of the worst. They studied high-risk management models from Marion, the behavioral control units of the UK, and even Cold War-era isolation chambers used for spy confinement. Every mistake made elsewhere would be engineered out here. When the first inmates arrived in 1995, journalists described the transfer as a military operation: armored convoys, helicopters, and snipers posted on ridgelines. The prisoners included names the public knew: men involved in bombings, assassinations, and organized crime killings. Inside, each was placed in a single concrete cell measuring 7 by 12 feet, built from solid poured reinforced cement. The bed, desk, and stool were molded into the wall, unmovable, indestructible. A single slit window, 4 inches wide, let in daylight but revealed nothing of the outside world except sky. The message was unmistakable: you are sealed away from humanity. Each cell door weighed nearly a quarter-ton of steel, opened remotely by control booths. Movement between units happened only through electronic locks, never by hand. The corridors were designed with sightline control. No prisoner could ever see another face. Inmates ate alone, exercised alone, read alone, thought alone. The cost of this architecture of control was staggering, over $60 million in 1990s dollars, but officials argued it would save lives. At the dedication ceremony, a Bureau of Prisons director declared, "This facility ensures the most dangerous offenders will never again threaten our staff or the public." But not everyone was convinced. Human rights groups warned that perpetual isolation would breed madness. A 1994 Human Rights Watch report called ADX, a laboratory for psychological decay. The ACLU filed early complaints, saying that the prison's purpose blurred the line between security and punishment beyond law. Yet the federal government moved forward, populating ADX Florence with the names Americans feared most: terrorists, gang leaders, traitors, and spies. Among them, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, Ramzi Youssef, the 1993 World Trade Center bomber, and later Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán. From the start, ADX was more than a prison. It was a symbol. A statement that the United States had built a place beyond fear, beyond violence, beyond escape. But behind those concrete walls, a new debate began to grow: whether total control could itself become a form of cruelty. The years ahead would test that question in ways no one anticipated. If you were to wake up inside ADX Florence, the first thing you'd notice is the silence. A silence so complete it hums. No footsteps in the corridor. No voices. Just the faint buzz of fluorescent light and the metallic echo of your own breathing bouncing off concrete. Inmates here live under what the Bureau of Prisons calls administrative control. It's not a sentence within a sentence. It's a condition. Everything is measured, timed, and observed. The day begins at 5 a.m. with an automatic flicker of lights. No sunrise, no alarm clock. You're awake because the system decides you are. The cells themselves are more like vaults than rooms. The door is solid steel with a small food slot, sometimes called the trap, which doubles as the only point of physical exchange between a human and the outside world. Through it, officers slide trays of food 3 times a day, often without saying a single word. Breakfast, usually lukewarm cereal, milk, and a piece of fruit. Lunch, a processed meat sandwich and chips. Dinner, pasta or rice-based meals reheated in bulk. No cafeteria, no conversation. You eat within arm's reach of your toilet. For 1 hour a day, if approved, inmates are escorted to what's known as the recreation pen, a concrete enclosure about the size of a single-car garage. Some call it the dog run. The walls are 12 feet high, topped with mesh fencing that allows a square of blue sky to peek through. It's the only time they can feel sunlight directly on their skin, and even then many describe it as disorienting, too bright, too empty, too silent. Former ADX warden Robert Hood once described the experience bluntly. It's not designed for rehabilitation. It's designed for control. And I think that's the key word, control. Even officers rarely speak to inmates beyond simple commands: hands through the slot, turn around, cuff up. When movement occurs, for medical visits, legal calls, or transfers, it's a process that requires 3 officers, restraints, and electronic tracking. The inmate is shackled at the wrists, waist, and ankles, escorted by armed guards, and followed by cameras mounted throughout every corridor. Surveillance here is total. Every movement, every sound, every moment is recorded. The floors are pressure-sensitive, detecting steps. The doors are electronically sealed from control rooms where officers can lock down entire units with the press of a button. Most prisoners don't see other inmates for years. Even at recreation there's no contact, just individual pens. Conversations are attempted by shouting through vents or plumbing lines, but staff can detect and discipline even those brief exchanges. The mental toll is devastating. Former inmates have spoken, through lawyers and rare interviews, about hallucinations, paranoia, and deep depression. One described seeing faces in the concrete. Another said the silence feels like your brain's being rewired. In 2012, a class action lawsuit filed by the law firm Arnold & Porter, with the backing of the ACLU, revealed dozens of inmates suffering severe mental illness. The suit argued that the isolation amounted to cruel and unusual punishment, violating the Eighth Amendment. Court documents described men smearing blood on their walls, mutilating themselves, and begging for psychiatric help that rarely came. The case led to a major reform: the creation of a new mental health unit within ADX called the Control Unit Transition Program, designed to move some prisoners out of isolation into step-down housing. But critics said it was too little, too late. The system itself, built on separation, could not be humanized. Still, the Bureau defended its model. Spokespersons claimed that ADX holds the most dangerous inmates in the federal system, those who've attacked guards, organized hits, or attempted escape. And they're not wrong. This is the final stop in the federal pipeline. Inmates here include men who once ran entire prison gangs across multiple states: the Aryan Brotherhood, Mexican Mafia, and DC Blacks. Keeping them separated is, in the Bureau's words, a matter of life and death. But even among staff there's quiet recognition that the system exacts a cost. Retired guard Bob Hood once said, "If you go to ADX, you're in a place designed for no mistakes." The problem is humans aren't machines. Every day inside ADX is an identical loop, 23 hours locked in, 1 hour out. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into years. The fluorescent lights never go fully dark. The air smells faintly of disinfectant and dust. And beyond the razor wire and motion detectors, the Colorado mountains stand silent, a horizon the inmates will never touch again. Long before psychologists had access to ADX Florence, warnings were already echoing through history. In the 1800s, the Pennsylvania system experimented with solitary confinement, believing it would reform the spirit through reflection. Instead, it drove men insane. By the time ADX opened in the 1990s, modern psychology had already confirmed what early reformers suspected: the human mind is not designed for silence. At Florence, that silence becomes a weapon. Every sound carries meaning: a door clicking shut, an air vent humming, a footstep echoing down an empty corridor. The brain, deprived of stimulation, begins to fill the void with its own creations. Some inmates start hearing voices, whispers, footsteps, the sound of their own heartbeat growing louder until it becomes unbearable. In 2015, Harvard psychiatrist Dr. Stuart Gracian, who studied the effects of isolation on federal prisoners, described the symptoms as a distinct psychiatric syndrome: agitation, hallucinations, paranoia, and panic. He explained that sensory deprivation doesn't just break a person's will, it rewires the brain's chemistry. Within weeks, short-term memory falters. Within months, emotional control collapses. For inmates serving life sentences, it becomes a slow-motion collapse of self. One former ADX prisoner, Jack Powers, spent over a decade in isolation after multiple escape attempts from other facilities. He later wrote from the inside, "You forget what it's like to hear laughter. You forget what it's like to shake a hand. After years, even your own voice starts to sound foreign." Powers eventually sued the Bureau of Prisons, alleging that ADX's extreme conditions triggered hallucinations so intense that he mutilated himself just to feel real. His case became one of several that forced the federal government to acknowledge, even partially, that the price of safety might be mental collapse. But the debate runs deeper than psychology. ADX Florence was never meant to be comfortable. It was built for control, and control at its core means deprivation. Each psychological reaction, the paranoia, the depression, the loss of identity, isn't just a side effect. It's the system working as designed. Prison theorists call it behavioral modification through environmental control. In practice, that means the architecture itself, the layout of cells, the sightless corridors, the muffled air vents, becomes an instrument of discipline. You don't need guards with batons when walls can make a man police himself. By 2005, Internal Bureau of Prisons reports began recording rising incidents of self-harm and suicide attempts. Yet, few of those statistics were ever released publicly. Human rights observers who managed to visit ADX described a haunting pattern. Inmates pacing endlessly, speaking to walls, or sitting motionless for hours. It wasn't defiance, it was disintegration. Even former warden Robert Hood admitted, "There's no way to pretend ADX isn't psychological warfare. It's not physical torture, it's sensory torture." Scientists who've studied sensory deprivation compare it to the brain being trapped in a feedback loop. Without variation, time itself loses shape. Days blend together, and without visual or auditory cues, the mind can't form new memories. It's why many long-term inmates, even those who survive decades, come out unable to function in normal environments. Some request to be returned to solitary rather than face the chaos of social interaction again. In 2017, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Juan E. Mendez, formally stated that prolonged solitary confinement exceeding 15 days should be prohibited. ADX Florence regularly keeps men isolated for 15 years. Still, defenders of the system argue that every inmate there has earned that placement. They point to cases like Richard McNair, who mailed himself out of prison in a crate, or Thomas Silverstein, who murdered 3 inmates and a correctional officer. Both men were sent to ADX to ensure no further loss of life. For victims' families, ADX is not cruelty, it's closure. But somewhere between justice and cruelty lies the question that makes ADX Florence infamous. At what point does protection become punishment too severe for civilization to justify? Inside those 7 by 12 cells, that question plays out daily, in silence, in madness, and in the slow erosion of what makes someone human. Every fortress has its legends, and ADX Florence is haunted by names that once terrorized entire nations. Inside these walls live the stories of men who commanded armies, bombed cities, and defied governments. Yet here they are nothing more than numbers, locked behind identical concrete doors. Each cell holds a story of power reduced to silence. Among the first to arrive was Ted Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber. A Harvard-educated mathematician turned recluse, Kaczynski waged an 18-year mail bomb campaign that killed 3 people and injured dozens. His manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, railed against modern technology and industrialization. In 1998, after his conviction, he was sent to ADX. There, the man once described as America's most brilliant recluse, spent his days writing letters and keeping a meticulous log of his confinement. He reportedly read classics in Latin and Greek, his intellect undimmed by concrete walls. Even in isolation, his correspondence reached universities, journalists, and fellow anarchists, a reminder that ideas could travel where people could not. Down the corridor, another infamous inmate, Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, served his sentence. Youssef once told investigators his goal was to topple one tower into the other, killing tens of thousands. His failure didn't spare him the harshest punishment the U.S. could design. In ADX, Youssef's world shrank to a cell without sunlight. He prayed 5 times a day on a small mat and wrote coded notes to himself, though every page was confiscated and reviewed. Former staff recalled him as calm, detached, like a man living in another dimension. Not far from him, Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, who tried to blow up an American Airlines flight in 2001, lives under the same conditions. His cell faces the sky through a narrow slit, and each week he's allowed a single shower and 1 hour of solitary recreation. For men like Reed and Youssef, whose crimes involve terrorism, the design of ADX serves both a legal and symbolic function. Permanent containment, both of the body and the ideology. Then came Zacarias Moussaoui, known as the 20th hijacker of 9/11. During his trial, he disrupted proceedings with wild outbursts, but in Florence, those rants turned to silence. In a 2014 letter smuggled through legal channels, Moussaoui wrote, "It's not a prison. It's a tomb. You die slowly, not from hunger or pain, but from the absence of meaning." Among the most feared residents, however, were America's domestic criminals, men whose violence erupted from within the country's own borders. Thomas Silverstein, perhaps the most notorious inmate in the Bureau of Prisons history, spent over 30 years in solitary confinement, much of it at ADX. Silverstein, an Aryan Brotherhood leader, was convicted of killing 3 inmates and a correctional officer during the bloody 1980s prison wars. In 1983, after murdering Officer Merle Klutz at USP Marion, the Bureau vowed that Silverstein would never have physical contact with another human being again. At ADX, his cell was built to ensure that promise. No direct sight lines, no conversation, no touch, a world engineered for permanent exile. Silverstein later described it as a clean version of hell. He spent decades drawing sketches of fantasy cities, sprawling in detail, perhaps an attempt to rebuild mentally what had been taken physically. He died in 2019, still under isolation. And then came a name known across the world, Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán. After his dramatic capture and extradition from Mexico, El Chapo was placed in ADX in 2019 to serve a life sentence plus 30 years. His arrival symbolized more than just another prisoner, it was a message. This was where escape was impossible. El Chapo had escaped 2 maximum security prisons in Mexico, once through a mile-long tunnel dug under his cell. But in Florence, even a tunnel would be useless. The facility sits on solid rock, encased in seismic sensors and motion alarms. His daily routine is the same as every other inmate's: 23 hours alone, meals through a slot, and 1 hour of recreation under a sky he can barely see. Other infamous inmates have included Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber, Terry Nichols, co-conspirator of the Oklahoma City bombing, and Richard McNair, who once escaped prison by mailing himself in a crate. Each, in their own time, became proof that ADX Florence is the endpoint, the place where defiance ends. But while these names dominate headlines, hundreds of lesser-known inmates also live inside, many transferred from other prisons after violent incidents. For them, ADX isn't just a punishment, it's a sentence of disappearance. They are locked away in silence, their crimes forgotten, their faces unseen. Even staff members admit that Florence changes those who work there. Officers often describe leaving their shifts feeling emotionally numb. The architecture isolates not only inmates but everyone who enters it: engineers, guards, medical staff. You don't raise your voice in ADX, you lower it. The quiet demands it. As one former warden put it, "This place holds America's most dangerous men. But it also holds its deepest fears, the fear of losing control." And that fear, some argue, is what ADX truly represents. Not just the containment of danger, but the embodiment of America's obsession with absolute security. ADX Florence wasn't built merely to imprison. It was engineered to eliminate risk itself. Every inch of its design, from the slope of the hallways to the thickness of its glass, was calculated to stop the possibility of escape, riot, or even unsupervised thought. The blueprint of ADX is not just architecture, it's psychological engineering. When the U.S. Bureau of Prisons began planning the facility in the late 1980s, they consulted defense engineers, security contractors, and behavioral scientists. Their objective: design a prison that could not be breached by man, machine, or mistake. The result is a 37-acre compound embedded in the foothills of the Rockies, surrounded by layers of technology and terrain. The first layer of defense is geography itself. ADX sits at an elevation of over 5,000 feet in southern Colorado, bordered by mountains, open desert, and harsh weather. The nearest town, Florence, is a sleepy community where residents half-jokingly call the area Prison Valley. Within a 10-mile radius are 4 other correctional facilities: the Federal Correctional Complex Florence, but ADX stands alone, both physically and symbolically. The prison's outer perimeter consists of double fences lined with razor wire and motion sensors that can detect movement within inches. Above them, cameras rotate continuously, monitored in a central control hub known as the Eye. This nerve center controls every lock, every door, every light. From here, operators can seal off an entire unit in seconds. Even the electricity and plumbing systems are segmented. No inmate can exploit the infrastructure to communicate or tunnel. Inside, the hallways are built in Z formations rather than straight lines. This prevents inmates from seeing more than a few feet ahead, removing any sense of orientation or distance. Every corridor is lined with blast-resistant doors that open electronically from secure stations, never manually. Each opening makes a distinct mechanical click, echoing like a gun chamber, a reminder that movement here is not a right, but a decision made by someone watching you remotely. The cells are the most striking example of ADX's control-based design. Each one measures 7 by 12 feet, constructed from reinforced concrete with furniture carved directly from the structure. Bed, desk, and stool molded into the walls. The sink and toilet are made of stainless steel with water pressure controlled remotely. The light is fluorescent, unchanging. Even the window, a narrow vertical slit, is placed at an angle so inmates can see only the sky, never the surrounding terrain. It's an architectural illusion of freedom, with no real direction to escape. Security extends beyond physical barriers. ADX is equipped with infrared sensors, seismic detectors, and microwave perimeter alarms. The ground beneath the compound is embedded with motion-sensitive wiring, able to detect even a mouse-sized vibration. Helicopters are prohibited from flying overhead without federal clearance. If a breach ever occurred, a scenario the Bureau claims is mathematically impossible, ADX could be locked down within seconds, sealing every corridor in the facility. Even daily routines are technological performances of control. Food trays are delivered through automated slots, showers are timed by electronic locks. Recreation is scheduled via digital monitors. If an inmate becomes violent, their cell can be gassed or flooded without guards entering the unit. The recreation pens, small concrete enclosures with steel mesh ceilings, were specifically designed to prevent coordinated communication. Each pen is isolated from the others by thick barriers, ensuring that even when outside, inmates are effectively alone. The control room, the brain of ADX, operates 24 hours a day. Here, officers monitor more than 1,400 security feeds from cameras covering every corner, even individual cells. Each movement is logged in real time. If an inmate leaves their cell for medical reasons, an escort team of 3 officers and 1 supervisor follows, all wearing stab-resistant vests and cameras. The path they take is locked and unlocked in sequential order so that no 2 doors open simultaneously, a safeguard against ambush or escape. Architects later revealed that the design of ADX drew inspiration from Cold War missile silos and nuclear research labs, where containment was absolute and redundancy was the key to safety. Even the concrete mixture used for its walls was formulated to resist explosives, cutting tools, and tunneling attempts. Former Warden Robert Hood, who oversaw ADX in the early 2000s, once said, "You could put King Kong in there and he wouldn't break out." The design's perfection, however, carries a philosophical weight. To make something truly unescapable means removing every trace of unpredictability, and with it, every trace of humanity. There are no shared spaces, no accidental glances, no conversations at meal tables. Every sensory experience, from light to temperature, is controlled. Critics say this level of design turns ADX into more than a prison. It's a human experiment in total isolation. By controlling every environmental variable, the Bureau created what some psychologists call a sterile behavioral laboratory. And though it may have succeeded in stopping violence, it's also succeeded in erasing something more profound, the essence of what it means to live among others. As one former engineer who worked on the design later reflected, "We didn't build a prison. We built an equation, and the answer is obedience." In the end, ADX Florence isn't just a prison, it's a mirror, a reflection of how far a nation will go to protect itself from fear. It's a monument to precision, control, and punishment, a place where every sound is measured, every breath monitored, every human impulse restrained. For some, it's justice perfected, no escapes, no riots, no danger. For others, it's justice deformed, a machine that breaks minds while preserving order. As debates over mass incarceration and human rights grow louder, ADX Florence stands unflinching, silent, efficient, and eternal. The fortress in the desert reminds us that in the pursuit of safety, we may have engineered something even more powerful than fear itself: absolute isolation. Before you go, if this story opened your eyes to the hidden realities of America's prison system, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us keep revealing the truths the world was never meant to see. Until next time, this is the Crime File TV, signing off from behind the walls of ADX Florence.